Welcome to another series of Camping with Liam. Today I'm going to be showing you guys how to make a tube tent shelter and a leaning survival shelter. Alright guys, generally there's all kinds of cords available. There's a thin cords that is very durable, very strong. And then there's larger, thicker paracord, which is also very should I say, durable. But for general purposes, right, I tend to use just one particular brand of cord, and this is just me, my personal preference. It's a little thicker. It's not necessarily paracord, but it is similar enough to use for these kind of practical purposes, and it is inexpensive enough that if I use it and lose it, basically, that I'm not going to really worry about paying that kind of money for it. But basically what I get is this utility cord, which I usually find at Walmart. It's made by Ozark Trail. It's a 1/4 inch thick, and they generally come in 50-foot rolls, and it's a 100-pound working load limit. So this is basically a good practical utility cord that I use when I go on my camping trips or my hiking or backpacking. Now, I wouldn't advise using this cord for sustaining any kind of weight, like for mountaineering or for like hanging yourself from trees or something, right? It's just basically a utility cord for making tents, for making shelters, for basic lashing items down, like tarps down, stuff like this. I don't use it for anything like too serious, for towing or anything like this. but it does serve good, and it is strong enough to hold such as tarps or tents or whatever, you know, for even up to very strong, stealthy storms, basically. I've encountered some serious heavy duty storms before out here in the woods and underneath tents or tarps, and this cord has worked perfectly for any kind of wind or any kind of storm. Okay, when I'm going to start to hang my line for my tube tent, or just for my hanging tent, basically, and it's probably the most common configuration of any tent. It's going to be kind of like a pup tent style, like an A-frame tent. And basically what I want to do is I want to look for a couple of trees that are going to be good, solid, strong trees. You know, make sure that they're not dead, because we wouldn't want to have one of them dead trees that fall over on you in the middle of the night when you're trying to get some shut-eye. We call those dead trees that have the potential of falling over a widowmaker, because if it follows over on you and you're dead, you're going to have your wife as your widow. It's kind of an interesting saying. They call them widowmakers out here. It just I don't know where the old slang comes from or where it goes to, but that's what we call them out here, is dead trees that have the potential of falling down on you. We call them a widowmaker. All right, basically the first knot I'm going to tie is I'm not going to do anything that's serious, just basically like sort of military knot, tying over and sort of configuring like a square knot. Now, I'm no master knot tire, so I generally just get along with a couple basic knots out here. You don't need anything that complex, just as long as it's going to be durable. Anyway, I make this loop because what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed this through the loop like this around the tree. See how I have it like this? That's what I'm going to do to the tree. Okay guys, the second loop I would make after I tied it down to my tree on the other side, right, is I'm going to pull my cord. I'm going to pull my cord taut. See how I have this nice and tight? And in about this area, just a little bit past the tree, I am going to make a knot with a loop on the cord, and just giving you enough of a hoop that you could, enough of a hoop like this, right, just so you can run your cord back through. And when you pull your rope tight, right, you pull it just tight enough just to make sure you try to check it to make sure it's level, which that's probably pretty good. Just kind of look at the horizon, make sure it's level. Maybe I'll bring it down a little bit more. Right about so. That's not too bad. And then you're going to take your excess remainder cord, like so, and you're just going to wrap it. And generally, I will go underneath where I have my main line. I would go underneath this. And I'm going to wrap. Ensuring you pull tight as you can. All right, that was kind of a two-handed operation, so I had to put my camera down for a moment. But anyhow, I have the cord suspended from the tree, and it's pretty tight. I mean, you can tighten this up. It's a little loose right now because there's quite a bit of a distance. But once you get everything established, you can tighten it up even further. But it's good to leave it a little bit loose to have it to work so you can work with it. Generally, these tarps are very inexpensive. I prefer to get the camouflage tarps that are available. I mean, this is your preference, but myself, I like a little bit more stealth out in the woods. I do have a series of tarps that I do use. Like when I go general camping, I'll have a blue one or a gray one or something, or just an all green one or something. But for general purpose of stealth camping or survival, I prefer to use camouflage because you're just less spotted. And I know, like in a survival situation where you're looking or waiting for rescue, some people like to use orange, some people like to use, you know, fluorescent colors to be seen, which that's okay if you're in a survival situation, right? However, me, I just prefer a little bit more stealth. So that's just, you know, you're just kind of out of the area, out of the way. And if you were in a bug out situation where you had to go out into the forest, right, and hide from whatever happens, right? Like, who knows? I mean, we're in such crazy times today that anything could happen. You can have uprising, you can have revolt, you can have, you know, we run the chance of being invaded. so having some camouflage gear to go bug out is probably a good idea. But anyhow, with my tarps here, the general sizes, they have come in various different sizes. But to make kind of some sort of like a shelter tent using a tarp, I prefer to go with a 20-foot by 10-foot. And it's relatively large, but that gives me a little bit larger area inside of my tent. Because if you're out in the forest, out in the woods, you don't have much other rain cover. And if it so happens to rain, it'd be much safer for you to be underneath your shelter out of the rain, as opposed to sitting outside of your shelter in the rain. So you have enough space underneath your tent, right, underneath your tarp tent, to basically get out of any potential rainstorms. Okay, I have my tarp spread out, right underneath the line. You can probably see the line is kind of barely visible. The sun's in the background, but I have my line spread out, and I have my tarp laid out underneath. So basically, that's kind of how I do it. I just kind of determine what side I'm going to have facing up, and I'm just going to pull it over the line. It's really easy. Okay, I have draped this tarp over my main line, and I looked and identified the center grommet because I folded this up. This is 10 feet long from this point, from here, this point right here, to this point right here. That is 10 foot. And that is perfectly long for me if I wanted to lay inside here, because I'm only 5'11", so I'm just trying to determine how long I need to make the tent. And a 10-foot wide area is perfect for me because, you know, I'm only 5'11", right? Some guys are bigger, or even if you're 6'5" or something, this still would be pretty good because, you know, it's a 10-foot wide tent. So, or should I say 10-foot long tent. And we'll determine the height once I get it staked down into the ground. But for right now, I'm basically showing that I line it up on the grommets, the center grommets. Usually if it's a 10 by 20 tent, right, 10 feet into the center, you should have a center grommet. Okay, and the remainder cord that I have taken and I've cut off 2 pieces of cord, which are relatively about 1.5 feet long. So that's about 1.5 feet long cord that I have cut off. And I cut off 2 of them, and I'm going to make some knots that basically is going to attach this tarp to that main cord that's going to suspend it. So yeah, it's a really simple thing. It's a particular knot where you could tie it in, it would be free to move back and forth, but then the weight of the tarp is going to hold it in place, and I'll show you. Okay, I have my 2 cords hanging on my main line, right? And what I want to do is I am going to tape and make a knot, or should I say a loop knot, at the very top of each one of these cords. And I'm going to achieve that by folding in my 1 foot cord here. I'm going to fold it about 2/3 down. Okay, since I had to set the camera down to make this knot because I need 2 hands to do this, I just basically tied just one single knot at the very top of the loop, right, to form sort of a loop like so, right, leaving just a little bit of excess down at the bottom of it. But it's basically a double knot, and in this tight, it should be perfectly fine to hold in your tent. Now the next step, what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed this through the grommet of the tarp. Right here, you want to feed it with the open end, right? Feed it through the grommet and the open end, and you're going to pull it tight through that grommet. Pull it through that grommet. See how that knot's catching up on the grommet? If you can see that. And then now with this excess, I'm going to feed it through this loop. So it's relatively loose up here. You see that? But I just basically going to pull to draw tension on it and just make it tighter. And it should all line to be a little bit tighter. So that should be plenty good, right? Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tension this to this rope, right? And I have to use both my hands to do this. So I'll show you the finished. Okay, basically what I've done is I've taken this first knot and made a knot, and then I came back through it and wrapped it around once, and then I wrapped it around twice, and I wrapped it around 3 times. So I have a knot that looks very similar to this, and you can pull the string. This is maybe a little bit too short, but it's long enough to work for this type of thing, because I generally try to work to save cord, but this should be just fine. But what I made is a knot, right? And I wrapped it. This is a series of wraps around the main cord. And then I pull it up through, right? And this causes that you can slide this back and forth both ways, as long as you keep that tension on it. And the tarp itself, it should hold that in place. You have putting some tension on it, it should hold that in place. You can slide this anyhow and retighten it, and then it should hold in place, right? So under its own weight, it shouldn't pull at all, but you can actually move this if you want. See? Okay, generally for steaks, I go to Harbor Freight, and they sell these 6-pack of steaks for like $1.99. I believe that's what I paid for these, and I grabbed a whole bunch of them when I was there last. So I bought maybe like 5 packs of these, all that they had on their shelf. And these particular steaks I like the most because they're very solid, heavy duty. I can pound them into the ground with any kind of like hard rock or roots or really clay. So these really serve really good for my tent applications, as opposed to all the many other types of steaks they have. And these are huge, and I generally bring a hammer with me, like a claw hammer. That makes it easier to basically, hammer them into the ground, stake them into the ground. And when I need to pull them out, I just use the claw on my claw hammer to pull them out. But okay, on the 4 lowest corners, there's the grommets, and I just use the stakes, my made stakes, just for the simplicity of doing this. And I just kind of stretched out each side of the tarp and put a stake in, and basically repeated it on all 4 corners. In this corner and that corner. There's some rocks right here, so I'm not going to pop that in too much. Well, I guess I could push it down just so I don't get it stuck in the rocks, because I don't have my hammer out here with me. So now I have my shelter basically secured, and considering this is a 10 foot by 20 foot, this is the 10 foot up here at the top. The ridge is the 10, right? From this side to that side is 10 foot. And then the rest of it, right, takes up. And so we have a relatively large shelter, and it serves to basically get you out of the rain. And it's large enough that you can comfortably sit inside of here as it's raining. And you know, I mean, I've seen people with the really small tarp tents, and you know, they're maybe what, 10 foot by 9 foot or something. But this is why I prefer to have a 20 foot by 10 foot tarp in this kind of situation, because you're just getting a much larger shelter cover, right? I mean, I can fully come inside here, and if I had my little chair, right, I have a little trifold chair, I can sit in here relatively comfortable when it's raining, and I can lay some branches out here and my sleeping bag or my backpack or something, and I can sit comfortably inside here, and it could be storming outside. And this basically gives me a little bit larger area for a tent. All right, now I am making a leaning tent with a flap cover in the front. And basically, I've taken the same 20 by 10 tarp, and I basically brought it up to the very first grommet. So you see how I'm hanging down? This is the first grommet, right? And I brought up the second grommet. This is the 10 foot span right here. And I basically tied off the first or the second in grommet on this tarp, right? So I have this little flap hanging, and I've done this on both sides, right? And this is basically going to be a leaning tent, like a leaning type tent, which gives you a lot more space underneath. Okay, in this method, you have a considerable larger area for your sleeping area, for being, you know, protected from the elements, from the rain or snow or what have you, or the wind or anything, right? But but in this method, I have this side open, and I've attached some rope to these grommets, considering that I only brought this grommet up here like one distance, and I attached it up here to the top, right? So I only come up one grommet, leaving this open area. And generally this open area would serve good. Like, say for example, you are in your shelter tent and you need to build a fire, and want to keep relatively from relatively out of the rain, yet you still have an area where you can build your fire right out here, and then you can have some sustainable warmth from this fire. Plus the heat would come in and it would basically reflect off the back of this tarp, so you had the potential to keep some warmth in and yet have a fresh air vent, so you can breathe easy and you're still protected from the rain elements. I've actually used this before in just backpacking situations, and it has worked great. You just basically, like I said, I built a fire in this situation over here, and I kept relatively warm, but I have a larger area where I can keep my gear inside. I can sleep comfortably inside of here, and yeah, so I mean, it worked out really well the time that I had to make it for a backpacking tent, and this is a good survival tent. Now this would work good for, you know, temporary shelter if you had just hunkered down for a few days in the same area. But from this particular design, I would start trying to collect up some wood, you know, possibly some long branches, and try to secure them to the tree and make it more of a stable type of frame. You could run a larger branch through here, or maybe possibly between trees that are not so much of a distance apart. Then you can start to build more of a sturdier structure. And I will go over those kinds of those kind of tents or shelters in another video. But this is just basically to show you two different forms of a survival tent, just basically to get out of rain if you're caught in a rainstorm.